Today I'm going to be taking you through the first part of my big Cyanotype project. So I'm splitting this into two, I think, because essentially we've got the part where I'm just experimenting and learning about Cyanotype in general, and then part two is going to be me actually following through and making the project itself. So today we're going to be doing part one. I'm going to be taking you through all of my experimentations and all of the things I've been trying out, what I've learned, and some of the prep work for the next part of the project. After trying out Rachel from Little Vintage Photography's little Cyanotype kit where she's already pre-coated the paper, I decided to buy my own chemicals. I have gone for the Jacquard chemicals. These come in a part A and a part B. It comes as a powder and you basically top up the bottles with water, give it a good shake, and then they're ready to go. And you do equal parts A and B to make up your chemicals. So after having done that, the first thing I did was to start coating different types of paper. So ranging from traditional sort of watercolour paper to finding random, say, bits of card. I've tried pages from a book that I really hated. That's why I have ripped a page out of the book, because I really hated the book. And just trying out different materials to paint onto, and then also things like different strengths, so different coats. So for instance, this lovely dark one had, say, 3 coats of Cyanotype paint on. I simply painted very thickly onto this one, and then I painted very lightly onto another one, just to get a feel for how the different thicknesses would hold up. So what did I learn from doing this? I learned that watercolour paper is definitely the easiest to work with. This paper is designed to absorb not only the chemicals, but also to then be easily washed afterwards. It's just sort of a no-brainer that that's going to be the easiest one. So this is from a box of Christmas tea that Eve bought me a couple of years ago, and I just cut off the size of the box because I thought I might try and make some Christmas decorations out of it. Ultimately didn't, but this was actually really difficult to work with. As I was painting on the chemicals, the paper wanted to sort of ball up, and yeah, it was almost like the chemicals and the wetness of the chemicals was bringing up layers of paper, and then equally when it came to washing out the chemicals at the end, I had to very carefully sort of dab, and we've ended up with a very uneven looking print on it, essentially. I mean, these aren't exactly, it's not like I've printed actual negatives. I've just taken random strips of film that otherwise haven't got any prints on, just to see how it would work. Just to show you, this is my little box of knickknacks that I use on my Cyanotype prints. So that was a big difficulty with this, I don't know, I suppose specially coated card. I'm not really sure what it is about this in particular that made it more difficult. And then equally with the page from a book, this was much more delicate. This is much thinner paper, and so again I had to be very careful about how much liquid was actually going onto it, so as not to pull off the text that's been printed onto the page as well. But actually I'm really pleased with how that one came out. So yeah, this was all very much experimentation. I didn't really have, I didn't want to create anything out of this. I'm quite pleased with the book page, and I do keep that on my little shelf behind me because I really quite like having that one out. I'd love to experiment with that more in the future, book pages and Cyanotypes. I know it's something that other people do, it's not unique, but I just think it's fun. But that's not what I'm doing for this project. The next thing that I decided to try out was enlarging my own negatives digitally. So I got a little bit of advice from Rachel about how she does hers. She says she just uses her bog standard home printer with acetate. So that's what I did. I went and purchased some acetate. I took one of my negatives and made sure that it was the size that I wanted it. I made sure it was a negative and not a converted image. And I made sure that I tried to choose ones with good contrast, although I did try a double exposure as well, which I'll show you in a minute. But essentially though, the settings I had on my printer and the type of acetate that I had purchased was incorrect. I'll show you the acetate, but do you know what I've done? I've pulled out those negatives that I made to show you, put them somewhere safe. Can I remember where I put them? No. So I can't show you the actual negatives. Maybe in the next video I'll go, oh look, I found them. But no, right now I don't know where they are. So what I'll do is I'll show you the acetate that I was using that was the wrong one. I'll also show you these images much closer up. But essentially the acetate has, I assume so that the ink can adhere to the acetate, it has a very grainy look to it. And then equally, because I just had my printer set on bog standard, I got this very stripy look to the negatives, which occurred because the printer is trying to print quickly. It's used to printing text rather than images. So yes, I realised that I made 2 mistakes, but I still decided to go ahead and do the prints, see how they would come out. I'm much happier with the single image that was very nice and high contrast. The double exposure looks quite muddy and murky. You can't exactly tell what's going on in the image, but essentially it was still testing, you know. What can you say when it's still a test? But of course, we've learned from this. So I purchased a different type of acetate, and I do have those negatives. I do still have those with me, which doesn't have the grainy bits on it. And I changed the settings on my printer. On the one hand, what I've managed to do is make prints that don't have the grainy texture. On the other hand, it does make it difficult for the print to work because there's nothing for the ink to adhere to. Now I have also realised that I think my printer is the wrong type of printer. I think I need a different printer because I really struggle to get the ink to dry at all. So my prints, and I'll show you a close-up of this, but my prints actually have a little bit of printer ink on them because even though they'd been left to dry, there was still some sort of thicker clumps of ink clinging to them. And it also means that there are certain elements that have smudged. Again, I'll show you much closer up on the light box, those smudges. But we've come out with some prints that I'm really happy with. So much so that I've been trying to make this for Eve's birthday. This is going to be Eve's birthday present because this is Eve when we went out and did a photo shoot. So this was something that I had wanted to sort of create as something as a gift. So whilst everything else here is a test, and equally this would have been a test if it hadn't gone right, this was something I had really wanted to make for her. So I'm really happy with how those came out, and then I had a bit more of the chemical mix made up, so I just did another one, just another random one. But yeah, so we can see a progression here. We can see that I'm learning. And because we've created something that I was actually really happy with, it was time to move on. It's time to move on to working with materials, because at the end of the day, this project is going to be based on fabric. So I want to do cyanotype on fabric. I am making a gift. Again, I'm not going to tell you what that is because there is a chance that the person that it's for will watch the video, so I don't want to say too much. But what I've done, I'm going to show you the backs, but I've got 3 different types of material here that I sort of work with my mother too, because she's, you know, she's the one that does the sewing. But we wanted some plain material. I picked up some scraps from her collection. So what have we got here? So this one here, it'll be very hard for you to tell, but all 3 have different textures. This one is what is used as curtain lining, so it's like blackout material, heat insulation. It's very plain, but it's got a slightly smoother texture to it. Our thought was that this one probably worked not so well, that it might repel the liquid a bit because of the fact that it's been sort of treated. We then have 2 different types of calico. One is an unbleached calico and one is a bleached calico. Calico being the material that you make up. You make up a calico, say skirt, and then you use the calico to, you know, get it all to fit correctly, and then you use that calico to make your final outfit. That's how it works. But so that's what we have. We have bleached and unbleached calico, and then curtain lining. And it was really interesting because the curtain lining absorbed the liquid, the cyanotype liquid, really well. It went on very easily, as did relatively the bleached calico. But the unbleached calico, this really repelled it really repelled the chemicals, and it took me quite a while to get it to sort of filter into the grains. It really wanted to sit on top in little bubbles of cyanotype chemicals. It wasn't promising. I wasn't hopeful that the unbleached calico would come out with much. When I came to rinse the chemicals off at the end, the unbleached calico really wanted to repel that. It really didn't want me to be working with it. Whereas the other two, again, were much sort of happier to be worked with. They were much more pliable. At the end of the day, I really like the look that came out of the unbleached calico, and this is the one that ultimately we've decided to use for our full project, because I also love how it's almost given it a faded denim look. It's really interesting to see how it works on the different fabrics. But yeah, and it's now time for me to sketch out the final design and to start working on that. So at some point, I imagine the next video will come to you in about July, and if the person is watching this, that might be a hint to who it's for. But the next video is likely to come to you in July, and I will film the whole process of making what we're going to be making. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Speak to you soon.